Ethan sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, the soft glow of the television illuminating his face. His fingers danced over the controller, guiding his character through a virtual battlefield. The familiar sounds of gunfire and explosions filled the room, but as the game progressed, something felt off. He shifted uncomfortably, a frown creasing his forehead. The vibrant colors of the game faded into the background as he mulled over the strange sensation he had been feeling for the past few days. He paused the game, his heart thumping against his ribcage. A sudden wave of anxiety washed over him, and he took a deep breath, willing himself to calm down. "Mom!" Ethan called out, his voice a mixture of urgency and uncertainty. In the small kitchen down the hall, Sarah was preparing dinner, the smell of roasted chicken wafting through the air. She was accustomed to the sounds of her son's gaming adventures, but Ethan's tone made her pause. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and hurried towards his room, her heart racing. "Ethan, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, pushing the door open. She found him sitting on the floor, controller resting in his lap, his expression clouded with worry. I don't know how to say this," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sarah said, kneeling beside him. She brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead, her motherly instincts kicking in. He looked down at the carpet, his cheeks turning a shade of red. "It's about my, He hesitated, the words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "My male part." Sarah's heart sank as she registered his words. The innocence of childhood collided with the harsh realities of growing up, and her mind raced. "What do you mean, Ethan?" she asked gently, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been feeling something strange there," he confessed, his eyes wide with apprehension. "I don't know if it's normal or if something's wrong. It just feels weird." Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. Panic clawed at her insides, but she forced herself to remain calm. Okay, let's take a deep breath together," she instructed, inhaling deeply and exhaling slowly. Ethan mirrored her actions, albeit hesitantly. "Can you tell me more about what you're feeling?" she prompted, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. Ethan bit his lip, contemplating how to articulate his discomfort. "It's like a tingling feeling," he said finally, "and sometimes it hurts a little, but I don't want to be a baby about it." "You're not a baby, Ethan," Sarah reassured him, her mind racing with thoughts of what this could mean. "It's okay to talk about these things. We'll figure it out together. All right?" His eyes met hers, searching for reassurance. "You promise?" "I promise," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling within her. "Let's just take this one step at a time." Ethan nodded, though the worry etched on his face remained. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she fought to push her own fears aside. She wanted to be the strong, supporting mother he needed, but anxiety gnawed at her thoughts. What if it was something serious? What if she couldn't protect him from whatever was happening? "Why don't we go sit on the couch?" she suggested, hoping a change of scenery would help ease the tension. He nodded again, and they both moved to the living room, where the soft fabric of the couch felt comforting against their bodies. As Sarah settled next to Ethan, she wrapped her arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "Do you want to talk about anything else?" she asked, trying to divert his attention from the topic that had cast a shadow over their evening. Ethan leaned into her, grateful for the warmth of her embrace. "Can we watch that new superhero movie?" he asked, his voice a little more cheerful. "Absolutely," she replied, grateful for the opportunity to shift the mood. She picked up the remote and started searching for the movie, but her mind still lingered on Ethan's confession. As the opening credits rolled, Ethan seemed to focus more on the screen, yet Sarah could see the worry still lingering in his eyes. She wished she could take away his discomfort, that she could shield him from whatever was causing him distress. The movie played on, but her thoughts were consumed with all the what-ifs that crowded her mind. "Mom!" Ethan's voice broke through her reverie, and she turned her attention back to him. "Yeah, buddy? Do you think it's normal to feel weird about stuff?" "Yes," she answered, her heart aching for her son. It's very normal to feel strange about your body, especially as you're growing up. Everyone goes through changes. But what if it's not normal? He pressed, his brows knitting together in concern. Then we'll figure it out together, she replied, her tone firm yet gentle. I promise you, no matter what happens, we will face it as a team. Ethan nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The movie continued to play, but Sarah felt the weight of his worries pressing down on her. As the credits rolled and the story came to an end, Sarah knew they couldn't avoid the conversation forever. She felt the urgency to take action, to protect her son from any potential harm. Ethan, tomorrow we're going to make an appointment with the doctor, she said, her voice resolute. Do I have to? He asked, his eyes widening in fear. I know it might seem scary, but it's important to make sure you're okay, she explained, brushing her fingers through his hair soothingly. You're my priority, and I want to make sure you're healthy. Okay, he relented, though his voice was barely a whisper. Let's get some rest now, she suggested, standing up and stretching. You have a big day tomorrow. As they moved towards his bedroom, a sense of dread settled over Sarah. What if the doctor found something wrong? The thought was unbearable. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together, she whispered to Ethan, who climbed into bed, his small form sinking into the comforter. Good night, Mom, he murmured, closing his eyes. But Sarah could still see the shadows of worry there. Good night, Ethan. I love you, she replied, kissing his forehead before leaving the room. As she closed the door softly behind her, Sarah leaned against the wall, her heart racing. She felt as though she was teetering on the edge of a precipice, with no idea what lay below. But one thing was clear. She would do anything to protect her son, no matter how deep the darkness they might face together. The waiting room of Dr. Harper's pediatric office was a cacophony of sounds, the faint murmur of conversations, the distant beeping of medical instruments, and the occasional wail of a child. Sarah sat in a stiff plastic chair, her hands nervously twisting the fraying edge of her sweater. The room was filled with vibrant children's artwork plastered on the walls, cheerful images of sunflowers and rainbows, yet they felt like a stark contrast to her turbulent emotions. She could hardly focus on the colorful drawings. Her thoughts were solely consumed by Ethan. Just moments ago, her heart had ached as Ethan whispered his confession. Now, as she waited, a storm of worry churned in her mind. What was happening to her son? Why did he have to feel this way? She stole a glance at Ethan, who was sitting a few chairs down, his legs swinging nervously, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He was trying to appear brave, but she could see the tension in his small frame. Ethan, she called softly, beckoning him closer. He shuffled over, and she patted the seat beside her. Come sit with me, he complied, settling in with a slight sigh. Mom, do you think it's going to hurt? His voice was a quiet whisper, laced with uncertainty. She reached for his small hand, squeezing it gently. I don't know, sweetheart, but remember, Dr. Harper is here to help you. You're very brave for coming. He nodded but didn't look convinced. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She wished she could shield him from this experience, to wrap him in her arms and keep all the uncertainties at bay. As a single mother, she had always tried to provide a sense of safety and normalcy, but now that foundation felt shaky. Can we go home after this? Ethan asked, his eyes wide with worry. Of course, we'll go home as soon as we're done, she promised. Maybe we can play your favorite game together? Ethan's lips curled into a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Okay. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Sarah turned her gaze back to the wall, her heart still racing. She thought of the countless nights she had spent worrying about Ethan, about whether she was doing enough as a mother. She had always been there for him, but this was different. This was a realm of unknowns, and it terrified her. She had read about different conditions, but the specifics of Ethan's situation were elusive. Her mind flickered back to the moment he had confided in her, the raw fear in his voice striking a chord deep within her. Mom, Ethan interrupted her thoughts. What if there's something really wrong with me? She took a deep breath, willing her voice to be steady. "There's nothing wrong with you, Ethan. You're perfect just the way you are. We just need to figure out what's going on. And I promise I'll be with you every step of the way." He nodded again, but Sarah could see he was still unconvinced. Just then, the door to the examination room swung open, and a nurse called out, "Ethan!" Her heart dropped. It was time. She stood, still holding his hand, and together they walked toward the door. The nurse smiled kindly, gesturing for them to enter. Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. Inside, Dr. Harper was waiting, his demeanor warm and inviting. "Hello, Ethan. It's good to see you. I hear you've got some questions for me." His voice was gentle, and he crouched down to meet Ethan's eye level. Ethan shuffled his feet, his gaze dropping to the floor. I feel something weird," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Harper nodded, his expression turning serious. "That's perfectly okay to talk about. Can you tell me more about what you're feeling?" As Ethan described the strange sensations, Sarah stood to the side, her heart racing with each word that left his lips. The doctor listened intently, nodding along, but Sarah's worry only deepened. Was this something serious? Was her son going to be okay? She could barely hear the conversation, her thoughts spiraling into a dark abyss of worst-case scenarios. "Mom, can you come here?" Ethan's voice broke through her haze, and she moved closer, kneeling beside him. He reached for her hand, grasping it tightly. Dr. Harper continued to ask questions, guiding Ethan through the examination. "Have you experienced any pain, Ethan? Or is it just a strange feeling?" He scribbled notes on a clipboard, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ethan glanced at Sarah, seeking reassurance. "It's just strange. It doesn't hurt or anything. It just feels different." "That's good to hear," Dr. Harper said, offering a reassuring smile. "Sometimes, as boys grow, their bodies go through changes that can feel unusual. It's all part of growing up." Sarah tried to absorb the doctor's words, but they felt like nothing more than a band-aid on a wound that ran much deeper. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she knew that wasn't how this worked. Instead, she maintained her composure, forcing a smile for her son's sake. "Ethan, you're doing such a great job," she praised, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "I'm so proud of you." After what felt like an eternity, the examination wrapped up. Dr. Harper's expression turned serious again as he turned to Sarah. "I'd like to discuss some possibilities with you. There are a few conditions that could explain what Ethan is feeling." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What kind of conditions?" Dr. Harper took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "There's a chance that this could be a rare condition, something we need to monitor closely. However, it's also possible that these sensations are part of normal development. I recommend we conduct some tests to rule out anything serious." The words "rare condition" echoed in her mind, amplifying her fears. "How serious are we talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Harper glanced at Ethan, who was playing with a loose thread on his shirt. "It's hard to say. For now, the most important thing is to stay calm and focus on the next steps. I'll refer you to a specialist who can conduct further assessments." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. "Thank you, Dr. Harper. I just want to make sure Ethan is okay." "Of course. That's what we're here for," he replied, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Sarah." As they left the examination room, Ethan's small hand slipped into hers, and she could feel his tension. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" he asked quietly. She squeezed his hand tighter, willing strength into her voice. "We're going to be just fine, Ethan. We'll figure this out together." But even as she spoke, a sense of dread unfurled within her, a fear of the unknown that loomed over them both like a dark cloud. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the sky, Sarah sat hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, her fingers tapping nervously against the keys. The soft hum of the computer filled the otherwise quiet room, but the words on the screen blurred in front of her. She felt a knot tightening in her stomach as she searched for anything that might explain the strange sensations Ethan had described. "Rare conditions in boys," she muttered under her breath, a sense of dread creeping into her voice. Each click brought up another article, another forum filled with parents sharing their fears and experiences. The more she read, the more overwhelmed she felt. Terms like testicular torsion and hypospadias flashed across the screen, each one more alarming than the last. It was as if the internet had turned into a dark tunnel, with no light at the end. "Mom!" Ethan's voice broke through her concentration, and Sarah quickly minimized the browser. She turned to see her son standing in the doorway, his tousled hair catching the fading light. His expression was innocent, but Sarah could see the flicker of worry in his eyes. "Hey, sweetie, just doing some research," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How was your day?" Ethan shrugged, his gaze drifting to the floor. "It was okay. We played soccer at recess. I scored a goal." "Really? That's amazing. I'm proud of you," she said, trying to mask her anxiety with enthusiasm. But the weight in her chest didn't lift. She could still feel the gnawing fear that had settled there since their visit to the doctor. "Can I play video games?" Ethan asked, his voice hopeful. "Sure, go ahead. Just remember to keep it down a bit. I'm still working." Sarah watched as he disappeared back into his room, the door clicking shut behind him. Once alone, Sarah's heart sank. She couldn't shake the guilt that had been eating at her since Ethan had first confided in her. She should have been able to protect him, to shield him from anything that could cause him pain or confusion. But here they were, tangled in a web of uncertainty. She took a deep breath and opened her browser again, scrolling through the articles that had begun to blur together. Hours passed, and the kitchen was dimly lit by the soft glow of the laptop screen. Sarah felt as if she had entered a world filled with shadows, her mind racing with possibilities. Each article she read confirmed her worst fears, and she couldn't help but imagine the worst-case scenarios. What if it was something serious? What if Ethan needed surgery? The thought made her stomach churn. She looked at the clock and realized it was getting late. "Ethan!" she called, her voice ringing through the silence. "Time to wrap it up. You need to get ready for bed." "Okay, Mom," came the muffled reply from his room. As she waited for him, Sarah's mind wandered back to her childhood, to the moments when her own mother had comforted her through difficult times. She remembered the warmth of those hugs, the way her mother had always seemed to know the right words to say. But Sarah was struggling to find her own strength now. How could she comfort Ethan when she felt so lost herself? When Ethan finally emerged from his room, he looked a little more relaxed, but Sarah could still see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Can you read me a story?" he asked, his voice small. "Of course," Sarah replied, her heart aching for him. They settled onto the couch, and she picked up a book from the shelf. As she began to read, she tried to focus on the words, but her mind kept drifting back to their situation. She could hear Ethan's breaths, steady and calm, and it made her feel even more protective of him. "Mom!" Ethan interrupted her reading, his voice hesitant. "Yes, honey?" she asked, setting the book down and turning to face him. Do you think everything is going to be okay?" His question hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope woven with doubt. Sarah swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "I really hope so, Ethan. I'm doing everything I can to make sure you're okay," she said, hoping to instill some confidence in him. Ethan nodded slowly, but Sarah could see the uncertainty still clouding his expression. "I just feel weird sometimes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like, I don't know how to talk about it." "I know it's confusing," she said softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "But you can always talk to me about anything. I promise I'll listen. I just don't want to be different," he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're not different, Ethan. You're special," Sarah reassured him, her heart breaking a little more with his admission. "Every kid goes through changes. It's all part of growing up." "Even if it feels strange?" he asked, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "Especially then," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "You're going to be okay. We'll figure this out together, I promise." After their conversation, Ethan seemed a little more at ease. But as the night wore on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was weighing heavily on both of them. She tucked him into bed, reading a few more chapters of his favorite book until his eyelids grew heavy with sleep. Later that night, Sarah lay in her own bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She replayed the day's events, the doctor's words and Ethan's vulnerable confessions. Just as she began to drift off, a sound pierced the stillness. Ethan crying softly in his sleep. Her heart raced as she jumped out of bed, rushing to his room. The sight of her son, his small body trembling with quiet sobs, made her heart ache. Gently, she sat on the edge of his bed, brushing a hand across his forehead. "Ethan, sweetheart, it's okay," she whispered, her voice soothing. "I'm here." He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and he looked up at her, fear etched across his face. "Mom, I don't understand," he whimpered, his words breaking her heart all over again. "I know, honey. It's okay to be scared. We're going to get through this together," she promised, pulling him into her arms. As she held him close, Sarah felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. She wished she could take away his pain, his confusion, and wrap him in a cocoon of safety. But all she could do was reassure him. "Everything is going to be okay, Ethan. I promise," she whispered, feeling the warmth of his small body against hers. In that moment, she realized how much they needed each other, how their bond was growing stronger through this tumultuous time. No matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. The morning light filtered gently through the curtains of Ethan's room, casting a warm glow on the walls adorned with posters of superheroes and video game characters. Sarah stood at the door, her heart heavy with the weight of yesterday's revelations. Ethan was sitting on his bed, his small frame hunched over as he fiddled with the edge of his blanket. The silence was palpable, broken only by the soft rustling of fabric and the distant chirping of birds outside. "Ethan," Sarah called softly, stepping into the room. She hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "Can we talk for a minute?" Ethan looked up, his blue eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and confusion. "Okay, Mom," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He shifted slightly, a nervous gesture that spoke volumes. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to mask her own anxiety. She sat down beside him on the bed, feeling the familiar warmth of his small body. "I just wanted to check in on you, about what you told me yesterday, about feeling something strange." Ethan's brow furrowed as he processed her words. "I don't really understand it," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "It's just, sometimes it feels weird, like my body is changing and I don't know why." "I know it's confusing," Sarah said gently, her heart breaking for the innocence of her son. "I want you to know that whatever you're feeling, it's okay. You're not alone in this. We're going to figure it out together." He nodded slowly, but his eyes were wide with uncertainty. "But what if it's something really bad?" he asked, his voice cracking as he spoke. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. "Listen to me, Ethan. It's normal to feel scared. I'm scared too, but we have to trust the doctors and talk about it. You don't have to carry this alone. We'll face it, whatever it is, together." Ethan leaned into her embrace, the warmth of her love providing a small measure of comfort amidst the storm of his emotions. "I just don't want to be different," he whispered against her shoulder. "What if something's really wrong with me? Different isn't bad," Sarah reassured him, her voice steady and soothing. "Everyone goes through changes, especially at your age. It's part of growing up. I promise we'll get the answers we need. And no matter what those answers are, I'm here for you, no matter what." He pulled back, searching her face for assurance. "You promise?" "I promise," she said firmly, looking him straight in the eye. "You are my whole world, Ethan. I will always be by your side. We'll get through this together." With a small, tentative smile, Ethan nodded. "Okay, Mom. I trust you," Feeling a renewed sense of determination, Sarah stood up and smoothed out her blouse. "How about we go grab some breakfast? We could use some energy for our next adventure," she suggested, trying to lighten the mood. Ethan's eyes brightened momentarily. "Can we have pancakes?" he asked, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. "Pancakes it is," she replied, her heart lifting as she watched him spring to his feet. They headed to the kitchen, where the smell of fresh coffee wafted through the air. Sarah poured a cup for herself and set a small mug for Ethan, who was already clambering up onto a stool at the counter. As she flipped pancakes on the griddle, Sarah's mind raced with thoughts of their next steps. She had been contemplating a second opinion ever since the doctor's ominous words had echoed in her mind. It felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, and she knew she couldn't let fear dictate their lives. They needed clarity, and she was determined to provide it for Ethan. "Mom!" Ethan interrupted her thoughts, his voice breaking her concentration. "Can we make them shaped like dinosaurs?" Sarah chuckled, her heart warming at his playful spirit. "Of course, we can have a whole Jurassic breakfast. But you have to help me with the batter." "Deal!" he exclaimed, his excitement infectious. They worked together, Ethan pouring the ingredients into the bowl with careful precision, and Sarah guiding him through the process. Laughter filled the kitchen as they attempted to create pancake dinosaurs, the shapes decidedly questionable but their spirits high. While they cooked, Sarah took a moment to reflect on how far they had come in such a short time. Just a week ago, their lives had been filled with the mundane routine of school, work, and video games. Now they were facing an uncertain future together, and it was both terrifying and unifying. She glanced at Ethan. His face lit up with concentration and joy, and felt a surge of love for him. He was so brave, and she was determined to be just as strong for him. After breakfast, Sarah pulled out her phone and began searching for pediatric specialists who could provide a second opinion on Ethan's condition. With each tap of her thumb, she felt her anxiety slowly morph into resolve. She found a clinic nearby that came highly recommended and quickly dialed the number. "Hello, this is the Pediatric Specialty Clinic. How can I help you?" The receptionist's cheerful voice greeted her. "Hi, my name is Sarah. I'd like to schedule an appointment for my son, Ethan. He's been experiencing some concerns that I'd like to discuss with a specialist," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Of course, let me check our availability," the receptionist replied, her typing audible through the phone. After a brief pause, she continued, "We have an opening next Wednesday at 10:30. Would that work for you?" "Yes, that sounds perfect," Sarah said, relief washing over her at the prospect of getting answers. "Great. I'll need some basic information about Ethan and his medical history," the receptionist instructed, and Sarah provided the necessary details, her heart racing as she did so. Once the appointment was set, she hung up and turned to Ethan, who was still busy cleaning up the remnants of their breakfast. "Guess what? We have an appointment with a specialist next week," she announced, trying to keep her voice light. Ethan looked up, his expression a mix of apprehension and hope. "Are they really good?" "They're supposed to be amazing," Sarah assured him, "and they'll be able to answer all our questions. I want you to feel comfortable talking to them about everything." "Okay," he replied, his voice small but more optimistic. "I hope they can help." "I'm sure they will," she said, feeling a surge of confidence. "And no matter what happens, we'll take it one step at a time. We're a team, remember?" "Yeah, a super team." Ethan grinned, his eyes sparkling with determination. As they finished cleaning up, Sarah felt a sense of purpose settling in her heart. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, not just for herself but for Ethan. Together, they would navigate this storm, armed with love and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. As Sarah and Ethan sat in the softly lit specialist's office, the tension in the air was palpable. The walls were adorned with cheerful posters of children playing and illustrations of anatomy, designed to ease the minds of anxious parents and their young patients. Despite the vibrant decor, Sarah felt a heavy knot in her stomach. This was their last hope for answers, and she desperately wanted to believe that everything would be okay. Dr. Mitchell entered the room with a warm smile, his demeanor instantly putting Sarah at ease. He was a bit older than Sarah, with graying hair that framed his kind face and glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. "Good morning. You must be Ethan," he said, kneeling to meet the boy's eye level. Ethan nodded shyly, his small hands clenching the fabric of his t-shirt. "Can you tell me what's been bothering you?" Dr. Mitchell prompted gently. Ethan glanced at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. "I feel something strange down there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully, his expression remaining warm and reassuring. "That's quite common at your age, Ethan. Sometimes our bodies do things that can be surprising or confusing. Let's take a closer look and see if we can figure it out together. Okay?" Ethan nodded, albeit hesitantly. As Dr. Mitchell prepared to examine him, Sarah held her breath, her heart racing. She watched closely, trying to glean any hints from the doctor's focused attention. The examination was quick, but every second felt like an eternity to Sarah. She could see Ethan's discomfort, the way he shifted on the examination table, and it made her want to scream out for him to be okay. After a few minutes that felt like hours, Dr. Mitchell straightened up and smiled gently at Ethan. "You did great. Now, let's talk about what's going on." He turned to Sarah, indicating that they could speak freely. "Ethan is experiencing some normal developmental changes," he began, his voice calm and steady. "Many boys his age have questions and concerns about their bodies, and what he's feeling is usually just a part of growing up." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she still needed clarity. "So it's nothing serious?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Not at all," Dr. Mitchell assured her. "In fact, the sensations he described are common. Sometimes it can be related to hormonal changes or simply a new awareness of his own body. Most of the time, these feelings resolve on their own without any intervention." Ethan looked up at his mother, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and confusion. "So, I'm not broken?" he asked, his voice small. "Absolutely not, buddy," Sarah said, her heart swelling with affection as she reached out to hold his hand. "You're perfectly normal, and you're growing up just like you're supposed to." As Dr. Mitchell continued to explain the changes boys go through during puberty, Sarah felt the weight on her shoulders lift. The tension that had clouded her mind for weeks began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of hope. She found herself smiling at Ethan, who now wore a look of cautious optimism. "Is there anything we should be worried about?" Sarah pressed, still seeking reassurance. "Only if the symptoms persist or if Ethan experiences any significant pain," Dr. Mitchell replied, his tone professional yet caring. "If that happens, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here to help." Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude towards the doctor for his patience and understanding. "Thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell. This means a lot to us." Just as they were about to leave, Dr. Mitchell's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and excused himself, stepping out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Sarah and Ethan in a moment of unexpected silence. Ethan shifted on the examination table, his small legs swinging back and forth. "Mom," he began, his voice uncertain. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah replied, turning her full attention to him. "I'm glad it's not something really bad," he said, his expression softening. "But I still feel different sometimes. Not just this thing, but like, inside." Sarah's heart sank at his words. She had sensed that Ethan was grappling with more than just physical changes, but hearing him articulate it brought a new wave of concern. "Different how, Ethan?" she asked gently, wanting him to feel safe to share his feelings with her. "I don't know. Sometimes I just feel sad or scared, and I don't know why," he admitted, his eyes dropping to his lap. "Oh, honey," Sarah said, her voice full of compassion. She moved closer to him, taking his small hands in hers. "It's okay to feel that way. There are a lot of changes happening, and it's normal to feel a little lost sometimes. You can always talk to me about anything. You know that, right?" Ethan looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Really? Even if it's weird?" Especially if it's weird, Sarah smiled, squeezing his hands reassuringly. You're my son, and I love you no matter what. We're in this together. He nodded, a shy smile breaking through his earlier uncertainty. Okay. Just then, Dr. Mitchell returned to the room, his expression serious but kind. I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long, he said, glancing between the two of them. I just received a call that I need to discuss with you. Sarah, can we have a moment? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She shot a quick glance at Ethan, who looked curiously between them. Of course, she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Ethan, why don't you take a look at this book? Dr. Mitchell suggested, pointing to a colorful anatomy book on the shelf. You might find it interesting while I chat with your mom. Ethan nodded, but Sarah could see the unease in his eyes as he picked up the book. As he flipped through the pages, Sarah turned her full attention to Dr. Mitchell, who gestured for her to step into the hallway. Sarah, he began, his voice low and careful. I need to talk to you about something important. It seems there may be a family history linked to Ethan's symptoms that we should consider. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A wave of anxiety washed over her, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Let's just say that understanding his feelings may require looking into some aspects of your family background, Dr. Mitchell said, his eyes searching hers for understanding. Sarah's mind raced, filled with questions and fears. What could this mean for Ethan? For their family? She glanced back at Ethan, who was engrossed in the book, and felt a sudden surge of protectiveness over her son. Whatever revelations lay ahead, she vowed to face them head-on, for Ethan's sake. As they sat in the quiet examination room, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly above them, creating an atmosphere that felt both sterile and oppressive. Sarah glanced at Ethan, who sat on the examination table, swinging his legs back and forth, his eyes glued to the floor. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken words and emotions that seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. Just moments ago, they had shared a small victory with Dr. Mitchell, but now, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on them again. Ethan took a deep breath, his small frame tense. Mom, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been feeling different for a while now. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and instantly felt a wave of concern wash over her. What do you mean, honey? She asked gently, trying to keep her tone steady. Different how? Ethan fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, his fingers twisting the fabric nervously. It's not just my body. It's like everything feels strange. I don't know how to explain it. He paused, searching for the right words. Sometimes I feel really sad, and other times I get angry for no reason. It's like I'm on a roller coaster, and I can't get off. Sarah's heart ached at his confession. She had seen glimpses of Ethan's emotional turmoil, the way he would sometimes retreat into himself, the moments when he would lash out over something trivial, but she hadn't fully grasped the depth of what he was experiencing. Oh, Ethan, she said softly, moving closer to him. I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. You don't have to go through it alone. I'm here for you, no matter what. But Mom, he continued, his voice trembling, what if I'm broken? What if something is really wrong with me? His eyes shone with tears, and Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. You're not broken, sweetie, she reassured him, reaching out to take his hand. You're going through a lot right now, and it's okay to feel confused and scared. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means you're growing up, and that can be really hard sometimes. Ethan nodded slowly, but Sarah could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. But what if I don't know how to be me? He asked, his voice cracking. It's like I'm supposed to be a certain way, but I don't feel that way inside. Sarah's heart broke for her son. She wanted to shield him from all the pain and confusion of growing up, but she knew that wasn't possible. Ethan, she said softly, sometimes we don't know who we are yet, and that's completely okay. It's all part of discovering yourself. You're still you, no matter how you feel. Before Ethan could respond, there was a soft knock at the door, and Dr. Mitchell stepped back into the room, his expression serious yet compassionate. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," he said, glancing between the two of them. Sarah felt a rush of relief at his arrival, but the tension in the room remained palpable. "No, we were just talking," she replied, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. Ethan was sharing some of his feelings. "Good," Dr. Mitchell said, his tone encouraging. "It's important to talk about how you're feeling, Ethan. Sometimes our emotions can be just as confusing as our bodies." He pulled a chair closer, sitting down to be at eye level with Ethan. "Can you tell me more about what you've been feeling?" Ethan hesitated, glancing at Sarah before finally speaking again. "I don't know. It's just hard, you know? Sometimes I feel like I don't fit in. Like, I'm not like other boys." His voice was small, and Sarah could see the vulnerability in his eyes. Dr. Mitchell nodded, his expression understanding. "That's a common feeling, especially at your age. Many kids start to notice differences in themselves and their emotions. It's a part of growing up, but it can feel really isolating." Sarah watched as Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly, the words of the doctor seeming to resonate with him. "What if I don't want to be like everyone else?" Ethan asked, a hint of defiance emerging in his voice. "What if I just want to be me?" "Then be you," Dr. Mitchell encouraged, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Embrace who you are, even if you don't fully understand it yet. We all have our own journeys, and it's okay to take your time figuring it out." Ethan looked thoughtful, processing the doctor's words. Sarah felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, grateful for Dr. Mitchell's gentle approach. "It's okay to ask questions and to explore those feelings," the doctor continued. "There's no rush to have all the answers right now." Just then, Dr. Mitchell's phone buzzed on the table beside him, interrupting the moment. He glanced at the screen and frowned slightly, his brow furrowing as he read the message. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, standing up. "I need to take this call, but I'll be right back. Okay?" As he stepped out of the room, Sarah turned her attention back to Ethan. "You see, it's okay to talk about how you feel," she said, trying to keep the conversation flowing. "I'm proud of you for being honest with me." Ethan nodded, his expression still contemplative. "Do you think I'm weird?" he asked suddenly, a hint of fear creeping into his voice. "Not at all," Sarah replied firmly. "You're unique, and that's what makes you special. Everyone has their own way of feeling and being, and we all struggle in our own ways. It doesn't make you weird, it makes you human." Before Ethan could respond, Dr. Mitchell returned, looking slightly more serious than before. "I appreciate your patience," he said, taking his seat again. "I just received some information that I believe is relevant to our discussion." He paused, gauging the atmosphere in the room. "It turns out there is a family history that links to some of the feelings Ethan has been experiencing." Sarah's heart raced as she exchanged a glance with Ethan. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with anxiety. Dr. Mitchell took a deep breath. "I've just learned that your late husband, Ethan's father, had similar emotional and physical experiences when he was around Ethan's age. It's not uncommon for certain traits or feelings to be hereditary." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and charged with emotion. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her, memories of her husband flooding back with a mixture of love and sorrow. "I didn't know that," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan looked between the two adults, confusion etched on his young face. "What does that mean for me?" he asked, his eyes wide with uncertainty. "It means," Dr. Mitchell explained gently, "that you're not alone in what you're feeling. Your father went through similar challenges, and it might help to know that many people experience these kinds of feelings as they grow up. It's a part of understanding who you are." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she realized the profound impact this revelation could have on their lives. "So, it's not just me?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Exactly," Dr. Mitchell said reassuringly. "It's part of a larger story, one that you're also a part of. And as you explore your own feelings, remember that you have the support of your mother and those around you." Sarah reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing it tightly. "We're in this together, Ethan. You are never alone." As the weight of the moment settled around them, Sarah understood this was not just about Ethan's struggles. It was about their journey as a family, navigating the complexities of identity, acceptance, and love. In that instant, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to stand by him, to help him understand himself, and to create a safe space for them to grow together. The room, once filled with uncertainty, now felt like a sanctuary of understanding. They were on the precipice of a new chapter in their lives, one where the bonds of family would be tested but ultimately strengthened.